Have you ever felt like the world is just totally spinning out of control? Like traditional institutions are kind of crumbling around us and finding just, unfiltered truth is harder than ever?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling that exact kind of vertigo right now.
Yeah,
It's a very unsettling time.
it really is. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating and pretty intense theological survival guide today.
We are. It's based on excerpts from a book called Dawn of the End-Time Remnant by Rian Engelbrecht.
And our mission for this deep dive is to basically unpack the identity, the strategy, and the mission of what the author calls the End-Time Remnant.
Right, which the text describes as the true bride of Christ.
Exactly. So we'll be exploring how this underground movement navigates, rising apostasy, how they use something called the upper room for spiritual activation, and how they anchor themselves to withstand these massive global storms.
But before we get into the weeds, we should probably give a quick disclaimer for you listening.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
This source material contains some very strong religious and prophetic viewpoints. And our goal today is not to endorse those views or to take sides.
Right. We're not preaching here.
Exactly. We're just acting as your guides to objectively explore the really fascinating frameworks presented in the text.
We've got our explorer hats on. So let's start with the landscape. The text sets the scene by arguing that we are currently living in a time of extreme apostasy.
Yes.
Now, apostasy is a pretty heavy, almost archaic-sounding word. What does the author actually mean by it here?
Well, the author roots this concept in the Greek word apostasia, which is a direct reference to the biblical book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Okay, so it has deep roots.
Right. And
Right.
in that context, it doesn't just mean a gentle drifting away from belief, like, someone who just stops attending church because they got busy.
Right.
It needs a great falling away, a deliberate and outright rebellion against the core tenets of the faith. But the crucial twist here
Yeah.
is that the text argues this rebellion is happening actually within the visible church itself.
So it's an inside job.
Basically, yeah.
The author paints this picture of a modern church that has been just completely swallowed up by traditionalism and what he calls itching ears.
Oh, yeah, that's a key phrase.
Which, as I understand it, is kind of a metaphor for people who only want to hear messages that make them feel comfortable and validated, right? Rather than dealing with hard, transformative truths.
Exactly. He actually calls a lot of modern Christianity a whitewashed tomb.
Wow, that's a strong image.
It really is. It's a direct reference to how Jesus described the religious leaders of his day. A whitewashed tomb looks pristine and beautiful on the outside.
Like it's culturally acceptable.
Right. It has the shiny buildings, great music, massive attendance. But on the inside, it's just full of dead bones. It's spiritually lifeless.
A pseudo-religion.
Exactly. It's retained the branding of Christianity, but totally lost the actual power.
Which actually brings up a really specific historical detail from the text that caught my eye. It mentions a prophecy from a man named David Wilkerson.
Oh, right, from 1973.
Yeah. According to the source, Wilkerson claimed he saw a vision of the end times where two distinct superchurches would rise up.
And Wilkerson's vision perfectly aligns with that whole whitewashed tomb concept. He described the first superchurch as highly visible and politically powerful.
The apostate church.
Right. It might still use the name of Jesus, but it essentially operates as a political union. Its focus is entirely on earthly power, social programs, and cultural relevance.
So no real spiritual truth or repentance.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm tracking. But then there is the second superchurch, and this is where we meet our main subject for today's deep dive.
The remnant.
Yes. This second church has zero political power. It operates largely underground to avoid, severe persecution from the mainstream culture, and even from that first visible church.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. But instead of institutional power, it is filled with immense supernatural spiritual power.
This invisible underground network is what the text identifies as the End-Time Remnant. The author actually compares them to a specific story in the Old Testament.
Oh, the 7,000 who refused to bow to Baal.
Spot on. It's about those faithful people who refuse to bow their knees to a false god, even when the rest of their nation, including their leaders, had totally compromised.
And the text gives them a really cool nickname. It calls them the Dark Horses.
I love that term.
Same. They're described as people without fancy theological degrees, without impressive corporate credentials, and, without massive social media followings.
Right. They aren't influencers.
Exactly. They're the ones who are routinely mocked, dismissed, and marginalized by the mainstream.
Because they refuse to play the game.
Mm.
I mean, they aren't relying on human wisdom or polished rhetoric or societal status.
Their identity is kind of stripped of that ego.
Yeah, they love the unvarnished truth, and consequently, they just don't fear human opinion.
Let me stop you there for a second, because I have to inject a little self-interest here.
Uh-oh.
Does my very expensive and somewhat useless communications degree disqualify me from being a dark horse? Because on paper, a lack of practical credentials sounds like I'd be a perfect fit for this underground resistance.
Well, I think the author would argue that it isn't really the presence or absence of a piece of paper that matters, right? It's about what you place your trust in.
Oh, I see.
If you trust your degree to save you in a spiritual crisis, you're in trouble. But if you rely on a deeper spiritual authority, you fit the profile.
Okay, phew. That makes sense. It really feels like a grassroots resistance operating right under the nose of a corrupted corporate empire.
That's a great analogy.
The empire has all the money and the PR teams.
That's the visible apostate church.
Exactly. And the resistance, the remnant, operates in the shadows. But wait, I'm stuck on something here.
What's that?
If this remnant is entirely underground, right? If they are purposely ignoring visibility and societal influence, how do they actually impact the world around them? Like, if you are a dark horse, what track are you actually racing on?
Well, that is the pivotal question. To understand their impact, you have to understand how radically they define their mission.
Okay.
According to the text, this underground resistance isn't mobilized to win elections or change tax laws. Their mission is singular, and it hasn't changed in 2,000 years.
Fulfilling the Great Commission.
Precisely. Making disciples and saving souls. And the text offers a really sharp critique of the modern visible church regarding this mission.
It argues that the mainstream church has gotten dangerously distracted by social justice, right?
Yes. Now, to be totally clear, the author isn't saying social work is bad.
Yeah.
He actually references Matthew 25, which explicitly commands believers to feed the hungry and clothe the naked.
Right, so he's not anti-charity.
Not at all. But he argues that in the visible church, this social work is happening at the expense of the primary spiritual goal. The text asks a really piercing philosophical question. What eternal good is it to feed a person physical bread, to make them comfortable for another day if they never receive the bread of heaven?
Wow.
Right, if their soul is ultimately lost.
That is such a stark way to frame it. It's a total prioritization of the eternal over the temporary. The text literally says the remnant's calling is to raid hell to populate heaven.
Which is an intense phrase.
Very. They view the world not as a broken system that just needs better policies, but as a burning building. They are engaged in a rescue mission for human souls.
And to execute a rescue mission like that, especially during what the text calls the Great Tribulation.
Which is a time of intense end-time storms.
Exactly. The remnant must have an incredibly solid foundation. And this is where the author brings up the famous teaching from Matthew 7.
That's the parable about building your house on the rock rather than on the sand, correct?
Yes. Jesus teaches that when the floods come and the winds blow, the house built on the sand completely collapses. But the house built on the rock withstands the storm.
And Jesus is identified as that rock, the ultimate anchor.
Right.
And the text points out a really fascinating historical detail here. In ancient times, a ship's anchor wasn't a beautifully forged piece of iron shaped like a hook, like we picture today.
Right, it was just a rock.
Literally a massive, heavy rock tied to a rope. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
The text makes it very clear that the house built on the rock gets hit by the exact same wind, the exact same rain, and the exact same flooding as the house built on the sand.
Yep.
So being part of this chosen remnant doesn't offer you a storm-free life. It doesn't mean you avoid the tribulation. It just guarantees your house won't structurally fail.
That's a crucial point.
So psychologically speaking, how does someone...
The waves are terrifying. The wind is howling. A sailor on that ship doesn't jump into the freezing, violent water to swim down and check if the anchor is still holding onto the seabed.
Right. I mean, they would instantly drown if they tried that.
Exactly. They stay in the ship despite the violent rocking, and they trust the anchor to do what it was designed to do.
Wow.
The author argues that the remnant survives because they're completely rooted in their anchor. They rest in the knowledge that the anchor holds, even when they can't see it through the darkness of the storm.
So the psychological comfort comes from knowing the outcome is secure, even if the present moment is terrifying.
Precisely.
Trusting the anchor to do its job so you don't have to jump into the chaos yourself.
Oh.
I really love that image. But, a ship doesn't just sit safely at anchor forever.
True.
Eventually, the storm breaks or a new mission comes down, and the ship needs a crew that is trained, capable, and ready to actually sail into dangerous waters to rescue those drowning people we talked about earlier.
And to get that specific kind of power and readiness, the text argues that the remnant must experience a profound internal transformation.
They can't just intellectually agree with these ideas.
Though they have to be spiritually activated.
Which brings us to the concept of the upper room, or the cenacle, as it is historically called. Now, for a lot of people, the upper room is just a tourist destination in Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, a historical fight.
It's where the Last Supper happened, or immediately following the crucifixion, it was the room where the disciples hid behind locked doors because they were terrified they were going to be executed next.
It absolutely was a place of fear and hiding initially. But the author emphasizes that the modern church desperately needs a return to the upper room.
Not as a place to hide from culture, though.
Right, because of what happened in that room next. It is the exact location of Pentecost.
And the text uses a very specific Hebrew phrase here. It says they were filled with the Ruach Elohim. What does that mean in this context?
Ruach Elohim translates to the Spirit of God, or the breath of God.
Oh, the breath of God.
And, yeah. The disciples went into that room fearful, traumatized, and entirely unequipped for the mission. But inside, they had intimate fellowship, they prayed constantly, and they underwent a profound breaking down of their own fears and egos.
And then?
Then the Spirit descended and activated them. The author makes a critical point. The upper room isn't a cozy spiritual lounge where you just hang out. It is an activation chamber.
So what does that activation actually look like in practice?
Well, look at what happened immediately after. They didn't stay in the room, they were mobilized.
They left.
Yeah, they unlocked the doors, burst out into the chaotic, hostile streets of Jerusalem. And Peter...
Same guy who had just denied even knowing Jesus out of fear.
Exactly. He preached a sermon that resulted in 3,000 people being saved in a single day.
That is wild. From hiding behind locked doors to commanding a crowd of thousands. That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
And to explain how that shift happens, the source uses an incredible analogy that I really want to spend some time on.
The cocoon, right?
Yes. It compares the upper room experience to a caterpillar entering a cocoon. Inside that cocoon, there is an intense, agonizing struggle. The caterpillar is literally breaking down biologically.
It's dying to its old self.
To become something entirely new. But that exact pressurized struggle inside the cocoon is the mechanism that pumps fluid into the butterfly's wings.
Giving it the physical power to eventually fly.
Exactly. The struggle isn't a side effect of the transformation.
The struggle is the mechanism of empowerment.
Yes. And the text points out that if you try to be, helpful, if you take a pair of scissors and carefully cut the cocoon open to rescue the caterpillar from the struggle prematurely,
Like it dies.
it dies, it comes out deformed, it can't fly, and it dies. Spiritual maturity, according to the author, absolutely requires the struggle.
You cannot bypass the upper room experience of dying to your ego, your comfort, and your own strength.
Because if you emerge without having struggled, you won't have the spiritual wing power to survive the end-time storms we just talked about.
You'll be a dark horse that hasn't been trained for the race.
It totally reframes hardship. It changes it from a punishment into a necessary preparation.
It really does.
So for you listening right now, think about this. Are you currently in a cocoon phase of your life? Are you in a period of intense, unseen, frustrating struggle?
It's a hard question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you constantly trying to rush the process? Are you begging for someone to cut the cocoon open so you can escape the pressure? Or are you recognizing that this specific painful struggle is exactly what is building your strength for the mission ahead?
It's a profoundly different way to look at personal suffering.
It really is. But let's take this to the next logical step. Once this remnant, these butterflies with storm-tested wings, finally burst from the cocoon and step onto the end-time battlefield.
They are going to need weapons.
Right. And the text makes it clear that their arsenal isn't physical. They aren't picking up literal swords or guns. Their weaponry operates entirely in the unseen world.
Which brings us to the core tactical strategy of the remnant, intercessory prayer.
Okay, let's unpack that.
The author does not view prayer as a passive wish cast into the sky or just a polite request. He defines intercession as aggressive spiritual warfare.
And he draws heavily on Ephesians 6 for that.
Yes. Ephesians 6 is the famous biblical passage about putting on the full armor of God. The core message of that chapter is that humanity's ultimate fight is never against flesh and blood.
So it isn't against other humans or political parties.
Exactly. It's against unseen spiritual forces of darkness. Intercession, then, is the act of taking hold of God's will in that unseen realm and absolutely refusing to let go until it manifests on earth.
The text calls for the establishment of 24-hour prayer houses worldwide, constant, unbroken communication and petition.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it.
And it highlights historical figures it calls watchmen who stood in the gap. People like the Scottish reformer John Knox.
Oh, his story is incredible.
The text notes he was so deeply engaged in intense intercessory prayer that he continued fighting spiritual battles on his deathbed. Or Stephen from the New Testament,
Who used his dying breaths to actively pray for the very people who were crushing him with stones.
Right. Those examples illustrate that a true intercessor, a true watchman, doesn't stop fighting when things get physically painful or culturally hostile.
Their vision is locked on the spiritual reality behind the physical circumstances.
But I need you to clarify something really practical for me here.
Sure.
The text uses some interesting geographical metaphors. It talks about these watchmen being stationed on the walls.
Like traditional guards looking out for the church.
Right. But it also explicitly mentions watchmen stationed in the countryside, which it defines as the marketplaces of the world.
Yes.
So let's make this concrete. Does this mean the remnant isn't just preaching inside church buildings? Are they actively fighting spiritual battles in, like, corporate offices and public schools?
The author confirms exactly that. The premise is that a healthy church should naturally lead to a healthy society. The remnant isn't meant to isolate themselves in a holy underground bubble. These watchmen in the marketplace are tasked with discerning the times. They look at economics, at corporate philosophy, at local politics, and they identify the spiritual undercurrents.
Okay, but how? Give me a real-world example. Let's say I'm an accountant at a mid-sized firm, or I'm a high school math teacher. How am I functioning as a watchman at my desk?
Let's take the accountant. A watchman accountant doesn't just refuse to cook the books or participate in unethical practices.
Well, I'd hope not. That's just basic morality.
Right. An intercessory watchman recognizes a spirit of greed or corruption operating in that corporate office, and they actively pray against it. They quietly claim that space for the kingdom of God, shifting the spiritual atmosphere of the boardroom before a single decision is even made.
Wow. And the teacher?
The watchman teacher isn't just grading math tests. They're acting as a spiritual shield. The text argues there are specific demonic agendas targeting the most vulnerable parts of society.
Particularly the youth and the family structure, right?
Exactly. That teacher discerns those agendas, perhaps seeing a rising tide of depression or bullying in the hallways, and they intercede quietly but fiercely for those students.
Fighting the unseen forces driving the despair before it manifests in a tragedy?
Yes, they refuse to remain silent in the spiritual realm, even if they are restricted in the physical realm.
That is a staggering way to view your Monday morning commute. I mean, the dark horse holding the line against the gates of hell might literally be the accountant in the cubicle next to you, or the barista making your coffee.
Exactly. They are the salt and the light, preventing cultural decay and exposing darkness from the inside out.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and recap this incredible journey we've taken through the text today.
Sounds good.
We started by looking at the landscape of extreme apostasy, where traditional church structures are failing and compromising, and that sets the stage for the rise of the dark horses.
That underground, credential-less, but spiritually powerful remnant.
Right. We explored their singular mission, which is to fulfill the Great Commission. They prioritize eternal salvation rating hell to populate heaven over purely temporary social fixes.
And we discussed the absolute necessity of anchoring your life to the rock, trusting that anchor to hold you firm when the unavoidable end-time storms batter your life.
From there, we stepped into the upper room. We reframed it from just a historical museum into a spiritual activation chamber. We looked at the cocoon, understanding that the painful, pressurized struggle of dying to self is the exact mechanism that pumps power into the wings of the believer.
Mobilizing them for action.
Exactly. And finally, we looked at how they fight on the front lines. They use the heavy artillery of intercessory prayer.
Functioning as watchmen.
Not just inside church walls, but out in the messy, chaotic marketplaces of the world. The schools, the offices, the government buildings, fighting for the very soul of society in the unseen realm.
It really is a comprehensive, intense framework for spiritual resilience.
It is. And for you listening, regardless of your personal theology or background, I think the core concepts here are universally compelling.
Definitely.
The idea of seeking uncompromised truth rather than settling for what's popular or easy. The vital importance of knowing what your anchor is and actually trusting it when the storms of life inevitably hit.
And maybe most importantly, learning to embrace the dark depressurized struggle of the cocoon.
Knowing that it's the only way you gain the strength to fly.
Those are principles that resonate deeply across any human experience.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds on what we've discussed today.
Towards the end of the source text, it mentions a beautiful detail about this end-time remnant.
Yeah.
He says that as they fight, they sing the song of Moses and the Lamb.
Oh, wow. It's a profoundly triumphant image. It unites the ancient, miraculous deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in the Old Testament, the Song of Moses, with the ultimate eternal salvation of the New Testament, the Lamb.
It is a song of absolute, guaranteed victory.
And the text points out a theological reality. The Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world, meaning the victory was entirely secured before the battle of human history even began.
Which is an amazing thought.
So, here is our final question for you to take into your week. If this end-time remnant fights the darkest, most terrifying battles of human history, with the absolute certainty that the ultimate victory has already been won, how would knowing the final, victorious outcome of your own greatest life struggles change the way you fight your battles today? If you knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that your anchor would hold through the spinning, crumbling chaos, how much braver would you be in the storm right now?
That is a question worth wrestling with.
Until next time, keep diving deep.